I'm Jules Ostara. Welcome to my home studio. In this video, we're going to play with all different ways we can use a brayer to make marks. So I'm using some black Sumi ink just because I had not opened it. I've had it for years, which may have affected its consistency. I did shake it up some, and I have it in a repurposed plastic tray that was from some food container, and I just cut it so that I could use the top for a tray this way. I'm always looking for ways to repurpose. And then trying different ways. So I was using the very tiny edge for the thinner lines, then almost using it like a stamp to get the length of it for a few marks, then a thicker part of the edge, and now kind of walking it across. Obviously the amount of ink that you have on it will affect your marks as well. So I'm working on a piece of watercolor paper in this first one. I'm going to work on a few different types of papers, but I am going to stick to just using the Sumi ink and the brayer, or a substitute for a roller that would work similarly, to see how many different kinds of marks I can make. But if you wanted to switch up the type of color, type of your substance that you're using, instead of the ink, you could use an open acrylic, like the golden open acrylics that won't dry too fast on you, so that you have some time to work. Even though I'm working relatively quickly because I'm doing several at a time, I would want something that's not going to dry too fast. Or you could try diluting some acrylic paint or use an India ink or an acrylic ink. I'm minimizing the variables and the choices when it comes to the color and the tool. So I'm just using the one color and ink and the single main primary tool, but I am going to adjust it and adapt it to make all different kinds of marks. This is a great way to warm up if you need to get the creative juices flowing in the studio, and also to stretch and use things in different ways. Like, I've never done that before. Stamping with the side of the brayer is something that I wouldn't have thought of probably if I wasn't trying to find more ways to use it specifically. And I am cleaning it in between steps pretty frequently so that I'm getting the more true representation of what that would be, and even flinging it, which I wouldn't have thought to do had I not been cleaning it that way. And then I wanted to try a few things in case you don't have a brayer, so I'm going to set that one aside. It's pretty full, and I want to start with a clean sheet. That can make a cool background or starting phase later. I was just completely free to do anything, not worrying about the results while playing. And so here I just wanted to try, what if I use a paint bottle, in case if I didn't have a brayer handy or it was tied up, which you'll see what I mean by that later. So while it's less convenient and a bit more messy to try to use it this way, it is possible to get some of the same kinds of marks. So you could play an experiment with an old paint bottle or some other kind of bottle if you have one, to try this. And if you don't have watercolor paper, see what do you have that it could be junk mail. In this case, I'm using sheet music that I purchased from the thrift store. It could be an old magazine. And then I had this, which was from a roll of ribbon, similar to a toilet paper roll, but it's a little bit stronger, and I thought I would try it as well. It was more porous, so it did not work as well as a plastic bottle or as the brayer did, because it's going to absorb more of the paint or the ink that you're using. So now I'm trying to alter the brayer for some different types of mark. This is similar to saran wrap, but it was something that came packaged over a bottle of paint so that it wouldn't spill. It was wrapped in this. So I'm going to reuse that instead of using some saran wrap first and see how that goes. So wrapping that around my brayer to see what kind of marks I get, hoping it would stick to itself so that I wouldn't need to tape it on there. And it would maybe work better with a little bit thicker, like an open acrylic paint, but that's part of the fun of trying all different types of materials and seeing how they work. So I might try this again with a different kind of paint instead of the Sumi ink, but I still quite like what was happening, getting some cool textures and patterns on the paper. Now trying it with the paint bottle just to see how that would work compared to the brayer. Definitely quite a bit messier to work with without the handle. Going to try it on the flip side of that sheet music, since I'm not attached to any of this and I can use either side in the future in collage. Obviously this did not work as well. the wrap didn't stay on. Now some cling wrap might work a little bit better, so I decided to try that instead and see if that held better. And I also taped it on with painter's tape or masking tape, which definitely helped, and it did make some pretty cool marks. Layering on the papers that I had used before, because you are going to run out of space pretty quickly if if you're like me and do so many to have it for drying. So going ahead and layering over if it's not fully covered. And then I also wanted to try it on this thinner sketch paper because I had more of it available and it's more affordable for doing this kind of experimental stuff. So obviously taking the saran wrap off of the brayer there, cleaning it up so that I can get a fresh start. And then I'm going to try wrapping the stencil around it. It's actually from Sequin Waste, I think, those little holes, but you could make your own if you don't have one with a hole punch like that, just by hole punching in plastic. I was using a piece of repurposed plastic, so you could make your own that way. It's a little thicker, so it would probably be a little bit harder to get it to stay on the brayer, but it would be worth a try if you don't have something like this. And I'm just taping that on a small little piece. If you don't have a tray like that for your ink, you could also probably use a paper plate that's a little bit coated so it wouldn't absorb it all. And voila! Pretty cool! I like it. Fun. I wouldn't do that with a more obvious stencil that was designed by someone else for copyright reasons, but for a pattern like that, it can be fun. So I thought I would try some more things on this roll that was from the ribbon. It had all different kinds of this kind of ribbon on it. So putting one piece back, tying it on there, and the tie is going to make a bump. I'm cool with that. You could tape it on if you don't want the bump where the little knot is. But I'm going to try grungy, bumpy, thready, a little bit, some of it shredding. There was a piece of fabric there that's shredding. You could try yarn if you had some leftover yarn from something. And then I put some masking tape on different parts, intending to take the masking tape off before I rolled it so that that would also kind of make like a stencil design, but I forgot to take the tape back off, so it didn't end up having much effect. But I still got some really cool stuff with all the other things. I really like the loose thread, and that ribbon roll just happened to fit over a paint bottle that I had, so I could use it kind of like a rolling pin, and that worked pretty well too. Again, it was an absorbent cardboard roll though, so if you were going to try to use something like that more than a few times, you might want to try to put some kind of coating on it so it wouldn't be so absorbent. So now getting into my stash of all different loose fabrics and threads, because I liked the loose thread so much. So you could see I just save a bag of little pieces like this for who knows what, for using in collage, or like this, which I would have never thought at the time. So I'm adding different little bits and pieces, wrapping and tying them as best I could, sticking some pieces under other pieces. And I obviously sped it up quite a bit because it took quite a while to tie it all and modify it. So this is what I meant in case your brayer's all tied up. Once you've done it like this, you might want to leave it like that for a little while, although you wouldn't want maybe the ink to be drying on your brayer panel, so not for too long. But if you wanted to leave it like that for a little while, then you could improvise, substitute a paint bottle for the smooth brayer during the same project if you're working on a project that way. And I really love how you could use that to make an interesting pattern with all these little loose threads. Kind of feels like a tapestry or something woven together, even going back and forth that way, especially gives it that energy. And I was just having fun playing. I was taking my time, even though I sped it up for you to respect your time in the video, and really enjoying the process, having fun, not thinking too much about what was the point, what was the purpose going to be, what was I going to use these papers for. That wasn't on my radar at the time, but you can use it for anything you would use other decorative papers for, like scrapbooking papers or decorative papers. And then once I had all of those off, just setting them aside and cleaning the brayer again, and the scissors that I used to cut that off, I had tied it in a knot, so I had to cut it off. And then I wanted to try a uniform, all of the same kind of string, so taping that on instead of tying it this time, and instead of wrapping it in a sequential, like uniform way. I'm going to let it be scribbly just because it was a mess, and I decided to let that go with that. And if it ends up getting tangled, I could always cut it off, so no worries. I'm just going to tape both ends so that it won't be flipping flopping all over the place and splattering ink all over me. So getting a fresh piece of paper to try with this one, inking it up, and let's see what we get. Ooh, one of my favorites. I really, really love it. Thumbs up, which reminds me, please give this a thumbs up if you're enjoying it. Thank you. And you can also share it if you have any other art friends who might enjoy it. And if you have any questions, you can ask those in the comments. I will do my best to answer them. You can also find the supply list, which is very limited for this one, in the description for the video, along with links to some of my other classes and art adventures and art play dates, if that might interest you. And here I am always trying to use as much of the ink or paint as possible without it going down the drain. So putting the thread or the string there to see what happens if I press it in between the pages. And let's take that other stuff that I had reserved from earlier, which might be starting to dry, but see what happens if we try to squeeze any leftover ink out of it onto these papers. And that worked pretty well and got some cool stuff too. So I thought maybe I can get even a little bit more ink out of those fabrics, these threads that I have here. So I'm going to put them on a clean piece and then spray them. A spray bottle is one of my favorite things to have in the studio, with just some water, and then press that and see what happens with those. And it definitely got some more ink out of it, and I decided to leave it on that when I started to move it, and then change my mind to let it dry some before lifting it, then cleaning the brayer again in between before trying something else. So I have this cut out shape, which was a botanical shape that I had cut out when it was painted paper that I cut out of a piece of painted paper. And so I decided to tape it on and see what would happen. It didn't stay on very well. My tape didn't hold very well, but I did manage to get kind of a cool design with it. So that's another way that you can mask out a shape on your brayer, is to cut out shapes from that had acrylic paint on it, so it made it a little thicker than just plain paper would have been. And now this is a piece of corduroy material from some old pants. It had a seam in the middle of it, so it was thick, and I decided to rip it off of that, which gave me more loose threads on the sides that I love, and made it so that it was going to be all the same height on the roller. So wrapping it around, I left a few areas in between so that it wasn't fully covering the brayer, because I think that might give me a little more interesting design, but you could do it either way. This is rice paper. It is smooth on one side and rough on the other. I'm just cutting it so that I can have a smaller piece to work with, and so that I can show you on both sides. So one side I'm going to do on the smoother side surface, and the other I'm doing on the rougher side surface. They both worked quite well, and it's also translucent, so you get a double-sided, a two-sided thing. You can use it with either side. No matter which side you put the ink on originally, you'll be able to see it from either one, so you could use either side up when you're working with it later. And then again, just trying to use all of the ink off of the brayer. And then I thought I should include these because they are some of the most commonly done, and if you haven't done it before, using corrugated cardboard to get some fun lines is a quick and easy thing, and it's another material that's easy to find. And the same goes for bubble wrap. So if you have some bubble wrap from some packagings, usually I use acrylic paint with it and I get circles like from the bubbles. This time, using the very fluid ink, I got a totally unexpected thing. So even though I've used bubble wrap many times before, using it with a slightly different materials gave me different results. A fun discovery. And then I have this stencil that I made in another course in the Inktastic online art adventures, and I wanted to just use up the rest of the ink that I had. So you can use stencil brushes with stencils and sprays with stencils, but you can also use your brayer to ink it, to do as a print, similar to how you would do pressed prints. So that's the way that I'm using it here. And as with everything, the results will vary depending on what your stencil's made out of and what type of ink you're using, or paint, with the brayer. And these homemade stencils work well with the brayer and the paper, although the ink didn't transfer great on the first one, so I decided to add some water to the container with the ink and try again, and it worked much better the second time. Voila! So if you want to try that, making your own stencils, you could join me for the Inktastic Art Adventures. I also make a set of coordinating stencils in A Year in Color, so there's links for both of those in the description below the video. And now this one that I had sprayed with water had time to dry so that the thread marks really could set in the paper. Then after they all dry, you can come back and look at them from different perspectives and see what you see within them. I could see a dragon potentially there, or an alligator, or a woman, a female figure here on the left. And at first I kind of thought about slaying your monsters, and then I gave her a music instrument just with pencil, just doodling on it. There was also a horse down there, so that rather she was playing music to calm her things. So I just made a few notes on the back and a few doodles with pencil that I might come back to later, I might not. This one looked like an underwater scene, so I saw lots of where it could be watery ripples and fish, and this one felt like more botanicals growing up. And also this one's really great for collage. You see the black and white would work well with all these different decorative papers, and I often use collage to heal canvases like that I received damaged, which they refunded my money, but I still wanted to use it since they let me keep it. So here's an example of one I did that way to heal wounds. That one is featured in one of my card decks. And I do a lot of collage in the Art as an Altar course if you'd like to check that out. All the links in the description. And then another way you could use it is under other things on rice paper. So that was something I made in the Inktastic course that I mentioned earlier, and you can see how putting different ones under it using that translucent quality of the rice paper gives you cool different layered effects if you frame them together. Here's one that I added paint to afterwards, and it gave it a nice vintage look underneath, so you can see more of how I used these in part 2 if you go ahead and subscribe. Thanks so much for joining me.